Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Selden, President of the Montessori Foundation, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Lindsay Pollack, who is the Provost of Sarasota University, the world's first accredited Montessori undergraduate, graduate, doctoral university. And this is the second in our series on succession planning, or how to search for a new head of school. And last week we met and we did it as a conversation, and a number of you said, could we go into more depth this week? So hopefully you're here. You will get a copy of the recording. We will be happy to share even the slide deck as a PDF. And if you ever need help with figuring out what to do because you've got a head of school who's looking at retiring, or you suddenly lost a head of school and you need to find somebody. While the Montessori Foundation is not one of the nation's executive search firms, we do know Montessori. We can help you find a head of school. And more importantly, because most people end up hiring from someone that is local to their community, we can help you from making a mistake, sort of help you organize your thought and handle the process well. Lindsay, please feel free to jump in at any point. There is a point-by-point presentation that is a simplified version. We normally do this as a 2-day workshop. And again, should your school ever want it, we can take you through a very, very complicated but very thorough process of preparing for conducting the head search and then bringing the new head on board and ensuring their success in the first year. So, Lindsay, can you manage the chats and so forth?
Yes, I'll be watching the chat and monitoring for questions and answers.
Absolutely. And
Delighted to be here with you today, Tim.
folks, please feel free to unmute yourself or ask to be unmuted. You can raise your hand, whatever you want. We're happy to have you interrupt at any point. And should the conversation get complicated, we can always arrange for a third session on this topic. So succession planning is crucial. The idea is that you don't wait, as we said last week, you don't wait until you're actually in the jam. You try to plan for it in advance. Ideally, your board will never suddenly decide they need to fire the head of school, although that has happened. Ideally, your head of school won't suddenly resign, although that has happened too. Lots of things can happen, but you ideally have a process where you're ready to implement a pre-planned procedure in the event that something happens. By the way, I can see someone approaching my door, and Lindsay, I'm going to ask you to hang on for a moment and manage people, and I will come right back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. As Tim was saying, it's always best to plan ahead and build your organization's capacity. One of my favorite quotes as a school leader was that we don't plan for if someone leaves, we plan for when someone leaves. This is really important to think about because we want to cross-train our staff. We want to cross-train our administrators so that if, for example, I was out for a day, I might have someone else who I had already designated to pick up some aspects of my position. So our admin team always had the opportunity to build capacity and pick up if for some reason I was unexpectedly out. Back to you, Tim.
Thanks. All right. So again, the real goal here, as I see it, is to remember that your school was started by somebody to do something. Ideally, when they planned the school, when they organized it, when they incorporated it, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, there was an identity, whether you're a Montessori school, an Episcopalian school, a Catholic school. Ideally, you know who you are, you know what your mission is, and you know how you do things. There's a culture in your school. The idea of the importance of this culture, as opposed to we're under new management, we're going to totally change our identity, which is legally possible. But people usually form a very deep relationship with a school. They may be donors to the school. They may be alumni of the school. They have a right, I would argue, a legal right, if not a moral right, to feel that the school will continue more or less in the line that it was following when they were there. Now, that doesn't mean schools don't change, they do, but they don't suddenly go from being a Montessori school and become a military school, or a non-religious school and suddenly become a religious school. The idea is a school ought to have an identity and a value that is consistent. So we want to prepare for the transition. And it's not if your leader will leave, it's when they're going to leave. It's going to happen. They're either going to die, they're going to retire, they're going to get a better offer, they're going to get into a car. Something's going to happen sooner or later. So you need to have a plan for what you would do if you need to temporarily replace your head of school or find your next head of school. So the first thing is you want to come up with a transition plan, and you want to have a real plan in writing for how you will manage a smooth leadership change. I would also argue that a board or the owner of a school needs to hold off from just sort of casually firing people. And it happens. People get emotional, they get angry. Somebody either throws a resignation on the table and says, I'm out of here, or vice versa. They decide that a school needs to be replaced. Lindsay, I don't know if you've ever been there, but I can't tell you how many times we have seen either the founding head fired or suddenly resign in disgust. It's not a pretty picture, and it leads to years of turmoil for a school, typically.
Yes, I've seen it, Tim, and it's heartbreaking, really, to see organizations that are, taken off guard by, unexpected transitions. And, as you were saying, we have an obligation to our stakeholders, to the people who've entrusted us with their children's education, to be prepared and to watch for those signs of imminent change as well. When there is something brewing, some cause for concern, it's always better to address that. I would say nip it in the bud, and be open and honest and transparent in communications with the stakeholders.
Right. And I think that's a good point. I mean, I originally trained in family therapy. One of the things we were taught is you could always get a divorce. You can always leave, but you can't come back. Once you destroy the relationship, you've created the havoc. And if you do, you do. You pay your money and you take your choice. On the other hand, as the stewards of a school, whether you're the owner of a school or whether you're on the board of directors of a school or the board of trustees of a school, I would argue you got a lot of people's lives at stake. And the goal is move carefully, think carefully. Is it good enough? Has this person done something so horrible that you have to have them out of your life this minute, as opposed to a calm, dignified way of just agreeing you're not the right fit for each other and you depart what we call the Montessori way of divorce, the idea of a kind, graceful, gentle way of disengaging from each other's lives without doing harm to anybody, including the children. One of the things we do in developing a plan for transition is figure out what are the key roles, who does what in this school. And I think this is an important thing to do anyway, because in most organizations, people tend to add on more and more and more people in the central administration because they keep thinking, I need an assistant and my assistant needs an assistant and we need someone to handle this and that and the other. And that doesn't mean they're wrong, but work tends to expand to fill up every person on staff's day. And they're all convinced that they're irreplaceable. They're all convinced that the organization could not run without them. You need to watch out that you're not creating a bloated administration. On the other hand, you need an administration where everybody knows what work needs to be done, when it needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and where they can find the written record of everything that has been done or needs to be done. Being an organized administrative team is important, and it's crucial if you're going to have a transition. By the way, it may be that your head of school says, I think I got 2 more years in me. In 2028, I think that'll be my last year. And that would be perfect because that allows you as a board, you as an administrative team, you as the head of school that's going to be departing or retiring to plan for the transition and start getting everything in order, in writing. Another thing you want to think about is how is information going to be transmitted? People in schools do not like surprises. Things work much better when they know that they are being transparently communicated with to the best of your school's ability. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that you can tell everyone everything. It could be your head of school is retiring because he's gotten a better offer and you don't really want to say that. Or it could be that you've decided that the person you've got is not the right fit for the next phase of the school's life. The bottom line is it's not that you have to tell people everything. It's that you want to tell them what you feel you can. You want to be sure that both sides, the board or administrative team and the departing head of school, are all saying the same thing, that there's no hidden messaging going out in the parking lot. So you want to have clear, ideally coordinated methods of communicating so you don't have one person saying one thing and another person saying something totally different. Anything you want to add there, Lindsay?
No, Tim, I agree with everything you're saying. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that when you know that you're going to have a transition, that's a great time to take a close look at where is the school at this point. If it were me, what I would do is have either an internal team do an audit of where the school is or hire an outside consultant like the people at the foundation. I know Dr. Pollock has done this many a time, where you go in and you take a look at every single aspect of the school. How does the school look financially? What's the administrative team like? How's enrollment look? How is the tuition? Are we overpriced? Are we underpriced? Are we bleeding kids before graduation? What's happening? What's going on and what needs attention? Do we have a morale problem? Are we getting teachers leaving us to go to other schools? Having an honest look at where is your school at and what are your strengths helps you in marketing the position of the opening that's going to occur to candidates. Now, this is true whether the candidate comes from within the school or from outside the school. You just want to be sure you're clear about what really needs attention and what are we proud of? What do we want to make sure doesn't go away? Another thing you want to do is define your leadership needs. For example, what are the essential skills that you need in your next head of school? And I'll come back to this in greater depth, but basically, my argument is you always want to ask yourself, what's the minimum professional qualifications? And that could be established by your state. It could be established by your board. It could just be common sense. Does it matter if they've ever run a school before? Do they have to be a Montessori educator in a Montessori school? Do they have to have a doctoral degree or a master's? Does it have to be in school leadership? There's so many possibilities. And by the way, one of my favorite heads of schools is Dr. John Moncure. When John became the head of school at Camden Montessori School, he was a retired U.S. Army officer from the National Military War College. And when he took the job in his hometown of Camden, South Carolina, he said to me, I have spent my life studying war. Now I want to spend the rest of my life studying and teaching peace. And he wasn't a Montessori educator. He wasn't even an educator at the early childhood or elementary level. He had taught graduate students, essentially. Dr. Moncure is one of the best Montessori school leaders I ever met, and it's in part because he approached it with humility, by an earnest desire to understand, by an earnest desire to make sure all the people of his school knew that he was there to listen and learn instead of coming in and shaking everything up. So you have to think about what's the background you need, what are the people skills, the communication skills, what experience do you think is important, and who would be good enough? Because you probably won't get your ideal candidate unless you're lucky. So you have to ask yourself, at what point can we say yes to someone who is not perfect, but who we can let grow with us? So the other thing you want to ask is, what leadership goals do you have for your school? You've got to have some sense of what do you want accomplished in the next 5 years for your school, because 5 years is a typical window that you normally want to hire for. You do not want to hire a head of school on a year-by-year contract, although you may have done it. Frankly, I've done it. There is no absolutely wrong answer. Um, the idea that, if you're not happy and they're not happy, either one of you should be able to walk away. On the other hand, this is a big responsibility. As an owner or as a board, you do not want to suddenly fire someone. And as a head of school, you don't want to suddenly walk away and leave the school that you're responsible for in the lurch. So I would normally say, think of at least 5 years at a time. That's the normal cycle for a strategic plan. So think about what do you want to accomplish over those next 5 years? That doesn't mean you've done a new strategic plan, because you probably want to wait for the new head of school to come in and help you as a school, and it is a school-wide process. Think about, where are we? What was in the last strategic plan? What did we accomplish? And do we want to update the strategic plan in some way, shape, or form in light of the change?
And
And then,
Tim, I'm
please.
sorry. Tim, I would just add that with the strategic plan, remember that it is an organic document. There may be changes along the way. For example, COVID disrupted many organizations' strategic plans, and it's important to go back to that strategic plan and revise it as necessary in some cases, especially if there's a catastrophic event, something that's happened perhaps out of your control that you can recognize as a board and review the strategic plan. Now, that doesn't mean your mission, your vision, and your values are changing, but the way in which you're delivering those items may change. So it's important to just, stay aligned to your strategic plan and know that sometimes those delivery methods may need to be revised or updated due to market conditions or other factors that may be outside your control.
The corollary to that is, you want to find before you find the person, you want to think about what the school's culture and identity is, because you're looking for somebody who is in alignment with your mission. If you're running a Montessori school, you do not want, as one school went through, to hire somebody who basically, once they're in, they're hired, all the hoopla is over, who says to anyone who will listen, Montessori is stupid and I need to get rid of it. I can't tell you how many schools I know that were Montessori, just to use an example, and are now something else. That doesn't mean they're wrong. It's just, who makes that decision? Once the head of school gets into position, he or she is usually able to do great harm very quickly. So when you're hiring, if you care about your school, you ought to be clear about, who do we want our school to be in 5 years? And how do we find someone who is in alignment with our mission, even if they're not someone who has spent their whole life in that particular subfield, like Dr. Moncure, who was a military officer, or like Lindsay, who started her first job as a Montessori educator with a background in education, but not in Montessori education, but has done very well. So there are lots of people who don't come from Montessori, Now, you can argue that a Montessori teacher doesn't necessarily make a good Montessori school leader because somebody who knows how to teach doesn't necessarily know how to keep the books or make the tough decisions or have people unhappy with them. And I assure you, whoever's the head of school is going to have people unhappy with them regularly.
That is so true, Tim. There is the Peter principle where sometimes people who don't have the skills are continually promoted to positions that they are ultimately less qualified for. And and that doesn't mean that a good teacher can't make a great principal. It does mean, however, that it's important to recognize the opportunities for growth along the way. And it's funny, Tim, I was talking to a colleague of mine who is looking for members of her admin team. She's a school leader. And she was talking to a potential candidate, and the candidate, sort of bragged about how they had finished their continuing education when they finished their master's degree. And I thought, and we both agreed that's a big warning sign. As the leader of a school, I always say I'm the lead learner because we have to continue to grow and develop and model that for our team. The landscape around us is continually changing. Budgetary constraints, legal guidelines, governance. There's lots of things changing in the world around us, and it behooves the leader to stay abreast of those things. And that means we have to continually keep learning.
So incredibly true. The other thing is, again, you can find ways, as long as the person in charge knows what they're good at and where their weaknesses are, you can often build a team that is balanced in such a way that the hard stuff that they hate doing gets done. For example, how many heads of schools hate firing someone? And yet, sooner or later, you will have to fire someone. And quite often, it will be either a situation where it's black and white, you have no choice. They've done something that is illegal. You've got to get rid of them. And you got to stand up there in front of the angry students, the angry, upset teachers, the angry, upset parents. Why did you do this? And not be able to tell people why you did it for privacy and legal reasons. Or it will be a gray area, which is much harder, where a tough decision has to be made and someone has to make the decision. It may be you, maybe the board. But if you're head of school, whether you made the decision or not, you got to basically go with the party line. If the board tells you this is what we're saying, you got to be able to be their representative and speak with one voice. So these are tough things, and there are ways to help people to grow and to help people to work around the things that they hate to do, as long as it gets done. Now, one of the first questions we ask at the foundation when someone says, we need a head of school is, do you want to think about an interim head of school? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. For example, if you need a head of school right now for next year, you probably want to at least think about hiring an interim head of school, because most good heads of schools have already made their commitment for next year. Or by the time they hear about your job in February and March, usually just not enough time. So what you may want to do is either find somebody, and it could be a senior member of your admin team, it could be a senior teacher, it could be, God knows, a parent, it could be somebody from the nonprofit world in your community, it could be someone nationwide who is willing to come in and be an interim head of school. There is actually a group of people in the country who that's all they do is run around. Usually they're retired heads of schools, and they run around, and that's what they do, take 1 year assignments to caretake a school for 1 year. Now, an interim head of school usually only has a 1 year contract. There are questions. Do you want that person to come in and be a caretaker? In other words, do no harm? Don't upset the apple cart. Just make sure everyone is calm and cool while the board or the owners do the search for the long-term head of school. Do you want them to come in and clean house to be the change agent. Sometimes that's the answer. And the other is you've got to ask, is this person somebody who you'd be willing to consider as the permanent head of school? Sometimes the answer is no, and sometimes the answer is yes. And there is no wrong answer. You want to be clear with everyone right from the start if you decide you want an interim head of school. What I would recommend against is putting someone in as the head of school with either a 5-year contract or an indefinite, undefined contract as head of school, as opposed to an interim head of school, unless you're absolutely sure this is the right person for the job. Don't hurry this decision.
Tim, I couldn't agree with you more. And I would just reiterate that, sometimes I see folks make a decision. They might say, um, well, we know this person. They've been at the school for the last 10 years. I'm 100% convinced that they should be our next head of school. And they'll rush to name that person because they think they know them. And really, for both sides, it's imperative to give the organization and the candidate some time to settle in. And naming that person as the interim first gives both sides the opportunity to make sure that it's the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
That person, as you said before, maybe they're coming out of the classroom, or maybe they're coming even from another admin role into the head of school, and they might think that this is what they wanted, but pretty quickly realize that they really don't care to be the head of school for any number of reasons. Maybe it's the amount of time they're spending at work. It may be that unexpected things came up in their lives. And if they are named the head of school right away, then they may be hesitant, or it may feel impossible to step down once they've taken that role. On the other hand, if they take the title of interim first, if it's not working out, it may feel and look different. The optics may be different. If that person then says, you know what, I think I've decided this isn't for me, but I want to stay with the organization, and I'll step back into that role where I was before. So I would reiterate that even if it's someone who's coming, that's an internal candidate, to consider that interim designation first.
Absolutely. So again, if you're thinking about an interim head of school, you want to think about, is there anyone you know who you think might be a good interim head candidate? And again, an interim head is normally going to do a full year. And the reason for that is typically, unless you happen to find someone who's retired who wants to become a permanent head of school, people normally are committed to their current school for full year cycles. In other words, the soonest they could move is typically July. So we normally work school year cycles, and an interim head might be appointed between now and June if you think you could find someone by June. But quite often, schools that do that discover that it's June and they don't have a good candidate. So it ends up being a year and a half. And it's just better if you just plan what's realistic right from the start. Again, the second thing is, if you're going to do an interim head, be sure they understand what is it you want them to do, and they understand what their role is, and don't assume that they're going to be able to magically figure out what's going on at the school. They're going to need a lot of support. They may be very, very experienced, but they may not know your school. On the other hand, it could be that it's a teacher and they may know the school. On the other hand, they may have a very, very one-sided picture of the school and what the school needs. Let me just take a moment and address a topic that we will probably come back to on this leadership forum some other week, which is the conflict between the social justice issue of teachers, Montessori and non-Montessori, who are not paid enough to live a comfortable life who do not feel that they are adequately compensated for the stress they put up with, who are asked to do more and more and more, who feel that they don't get the respect, the support, the emotional gratitude that they expect from parents or their administration or the board, and basically feel that this is an issue of social justice, that somebody is taking that money, and whether it's the parents that aren't being asked to pay enough, and so they got to pay the price, or the board is wasting money on stuff that they think is stupid, like a swimming pool or a new gym or a new library, that stupid high school that they don't think their K through 12 school needs, or that the head of school is being paid way too much money. Whatever it is, you can have real resentment within your faculty. So again, one of the challenges we've got is to make sure if you bring a teacher out of the classroom and into the heads of school, they're going to know things that they didn't necessarily know as teachers. And they need to know how to keep confidentiality, and they need to know how to understand the balance of all the different aspects of the organization, and that sometimes there are going to be moral conflicts about who gets what in a conflict of competing priorities. Lindsay, any thoughts there?
Tim, this this is a conversation that we could have across education from early childhood to high school, and it
And
really
university.
becomes yeah, to university. You're right. And I was having this conversation with someone the other day regarding early childhood wages. I know NAEYC right now was just polling early childhood staff members on national wages because we have seen disparities in education for a very long time. And so, whether you're public, private, charter, secular, religious based schools, we see these considerations as far as earning livable wages. I don't have the answer. And I think it's also important that folks who are going into a leadership track understand this dynamic and be sensitive to disparities in the workforce as well. So, looking at your staff members, what is the differential between someone who's a lead teacher and someone who is working as an assistant in the classroom? What are the disparities between people in the office? um, and folks in the cafeteria, folks, your critical support staff. How are we structuring our environments so that our people that we care about are earning a livable wage? And that includes things like benefits. How are we caring for the people who care for us? I wish I had the answer, Tim, but it's a it's an age-old question. I see in the chat that it looks like Betty has added New Mexico is requiring that we start entry wages at $19 per hour, and it goes up from there. Thank you, Betty.
Absolutely, Betty, and I appreciate that. So the bottom line is, I think everyone, at least here, would agree that teachers deserve to be paid every dollar that we possibly can. On the other hand, we also have to understand that there are challenges. One of them is if you are publicly funded, all you can pay is what the school board is willing to authorize, and it can only authorize what it convinces the taxpayers to pay, what it can get out of the state, and what the state can get out of the federal government or some other sources. There's only so much money. And our country historically has not valued educators in the way that we have valued other people. That's bigger than our ability to change. We can certainly have opinions, but we got to operate within the realities. Secondly, we are in a capitalist country. If you're in a for-profit school, you got to work within the ability what does it take to get people who are investing money to build schools to feel that it's worthwhile to take the risk and have their money at risk and tied up. This is the challenge of every business. The good news is, despite all the anxiety, I can't see too many schools using AI to teach. I mean, I see some efforts to try, but the reality is this is a human connection, and you got to have humans present to make sure kids don't get hurt and that they're not beating up on each other and all those good things. Anyway, the bottom line is, if you take a teacher out of the classroom, there's a good chance they are going to be confronted with moral challenges they may have never had to deal with before. And they need a lot of support to be able to do their job in that. I think teachers can be great heads of schools, but it's very shocking once you're no longer one of them to discover that your colleagues are now gamey with you. They either want to seduce you into doing things that they want, or they're angry with you because you're not giving them what they want. It can be very upsetting. So we have
And
to position. Yeah.
Tim, to that point, you know, it made me chuckle a little bit because I had a friend of mine who became a head of school, and she called me one day in a little bit of a panic. She said, "You know, now that I've become head of school, I'm now understanding why." A lot of the things that I used to complain about before I was head of school, I really can't change now that I am the head of school. And she had called because she said that she had gotten into a conversation with a person who used to be on her grade level team. And her colleague was saying, "Well, hey, now that you're head of school, you can change all the things that we used to talk about, right?" And she had to go back to this person and say, "Well, you know what? Now that I am head of school, I really understand why things are the way they are, and I'm so sorry I can't change them." So, you know, I think that's also a testament to, uh, you know, the fact that if we have a question, go to the source and ask before we, may discuss things that we don't fully understand. Um, and don't be surprised if you take on a role and then come to a full understanding of the situation. Um, Again, that goes to, landing in a position, and then understanding the full scope of the role and the responsibilities.
Well said. All right, so we're again that today's main topic is how do you recruit a new head of school. So the next step is how do you position the school. This is as you're getting ready to begin the search. You have to think about where are we, and what this slide is trying to say is you want to think about who the school is and what does the school need, and the more you can get your students, your parents, and your staff engaged in that collaborative approach, it will tend to produce a better result. I think one of my friends, Michael Bourne, always said, never fail to take advantage of a disaster. In other words, any kind of like a hurricane or whatever is an opportunity to build a stronger community. A need to find a new head of school is a challenge and it's stressful. It's also an opportunity to build a school community that's even stronger than it was before. So you need a timeline. Ideally, you learn that there's going to be a new head of school position open about a year and a half in advance. So ideally, let's say somebody says, I think this is going to be my last year coming up. You spend the spring and the summer planning what are you going to do, what needs to be done, who's going to do it, and you get it all in writing, including working on the milestones. Then typically you spend the fall recruiting, basically getting the word out through whatever means you can. Indeed, LinkedIn, um, ads on your website, ads on whatever professional organizations, whatever you're going to do. You may go to a national executive search firm like Carney Sando or Korn Ferry, or in the Montessori world, we have Metro Montessori and we have the Montessori Foundation. There's no wrong answer. You just need to get as many candidates as you can. Lindsay?
Yes, Tim, I would also encourage folks to call um, heads of schools that you respect and admire, and ask them if they have anyone on their team that's ready to move up. You know, as a head of school, I felt that I was always um, I, training and developing my team so that they were ready. If I knew that that was their goal to become a head of school, I wanted to be sure that I was equipping them with the skills for them to reach their dreams and their career goals as well. So if you have someone in your circle of fellow heads of schools that you admire and respect, you might also reach out to them to see if they might even know of a candidate, someone who's sort of in the pipeline, if you will, for a head of school position.
Absolutely. All right. So again, in the fall, we're going to do everything we can to get as many candidates identified as possible. And I'm going to go back into more detail about what you want to do as you try to get them interested. But then in the winter, that's when you're assessing candidates. And of course, you can assess them sooner, but winter is sort of the deadline. You really need to be by March, end of March, you want to be done with interviewing candidates, ideally. Now, again, if you haven't found someone, but you've got good candidates and you're trying to determine are they a good fit, fine. I would never be rigid on calendars. The bottom line is you want to find the right person, do the best you can, and be as creative as you can. And as Lindsay said, you want to network. You want to be as creative as you can to get the word out there that you are looking for a person, and let people know why would they want to come to your school? What's it like to live in Houston? What's it like at your school? Why would they choose your school? This is not simply about money. It is more than money, although money is certainly important. People take jobs where they feel like they're going to be able to be effective, where their lives are not going to be made miserable by a board that I'm not sure what just happened here. Huh. Got a thing on my screen that I've never seen before, a little timer thing. Well, hopefully it's going to be okay. I think we're now, boy, my dog got on the screen and changed things around. All right. So in the winter, we're doing interviews, we're doing lots of Zoom calls, we're checking out references, we're double checking they actually have the degrees they say they have, because people have hired people who had false resumes. So you do need to really check that people are who they say they are, because it's very embarrassing as a school if your chief executive officer turns out to be a fraud.
And Tim, I would just expand that to make sure you're checking social media. Check the individual's profiles, check what they're posting online. This is something that I started including in my references. I would ask candidates to provide their public profiles. So if they had a public Instagram account, a public Facebook account, LinkedIn account, it was important to me to ask for those social media handles as well. Now, what they post on their private websites is their private business. However, if they have public pages, they've made it known that this is who they are and this is open to the public. So I would ask for that on the application as well. And it's important to check those out.
And there are, employment law issues you got to look at that maybe
Absolutely.
they could be federal, they could be for your state. But I'll go further. There are people that have private Facebook pages. And guess what? If they allow someone from your school community or someone that is known to your school community, and it turns out that in private, they are saying things that are embarrassing, it can really bite you. The head of school is your top representative. They are your voice of your school. They're your minister, your rabbi, your priest. If they embarrass you, you got a problem. So while you may or may not be able to ask them, do you have private pages? Probably you could at least, I'm not an employment law person, but I would at least say, is there anything that you have out there that could be an embarrassment if it were known? If there is, let's talk about it now. Because if it's out there, sooner or later, it's going to come into the public. In the spring, you're going to make your choice. You're going to onboard your new head of school carefully. You're going to introduce them to the community. And that onboarding is a whole process, not only of having a party to celebrate the outgoing head and welcome the new. And by the way, do not forget your outgoing head. They need to be honored, and the new person needs to come in. And ideally, you get the two in some kind of working relationship so the new head of school can easily reach out to the outgone head of school and say, I'm not sure what's the deal with this teacher. what was your take on this situation? Because they have so much institutional knowledge. And it may be knowledge that the other members of the admin team have, and it may be that they know stuff that the other members of the admin team don't know. So again, you want to have the best process of passing of knowledge from one to the other that you possibly can.
And Tim, I love this timeline. If you're in the audience and you're thinking, well, my timeline isn't going to start in the summer, that's okay. This still can be your starting point. Just rename summer one to Q1 and then Q2, Q3, Q4, quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, quarter four. Just this represents a timeline of the process. Remember, this is time intensive, so take your time, really vet your candidate, and you'll be better off in the end.
So we want to do, a whole plan for communication. And that's again thinking about not only how are we going to avoid sending out mixed messages or failing to communicate, but how are we going to do it in a way where we have a real plan of what do we tell people and when and how do we tell them? Are we going to hold public meetings? Are we going to invite people to Zoom meetings to meet the candidate? What are we going to do? So there's a lot of ways it can be done. We recommend you have a whole plan of how you're going to handle the search process. Because keep in mind, you're probably going to have two or more candidates. One of them could be known to your school community. It could be a favored teacher. It could be somebody who the community meets for the first time, but they fall in love with. And your board or your owners may choose someone different from what the teachers think is the perfect person or that the parents think is the perfect person. So again, what you're trying to do is avoid having political factions start up. You're trying to make sure that everyone knows what's going on, even though there will always be certain things that you know that they don't know. But you want to minimize that perception of this is happening in a smoke-filled room. Now, sooner or later, you're going to say, I think we know who we want to have in our school, and we're going to make them an offer. And so you need to think about what's the offer? I mean, it's one thing to say, Dr. Pollack, would you be interested in this job if we offer it to you? But among other things, you want to know, well, what are you going to pay me? And will there be any benefits? And will there be health insurance? And are you going to provide me with the moving expenses if I don't live in town? And are you going to provide me with a housing allowance? And is there going to be a 401k plan? Are there any incentive bonuses if I really do a great job? You just make sure you're really clear and put in writing what are the terms of the agreement. Another thing you want to think about is that whatever's in your contract, the responsibilities, if you had to cancel the contract for some reason because they're not working out, what's the deal? Do you have to pay them 5 years worth of wages? Do you have a 60-day kick-out clause? Do you have a no-fault divorce? Can they walk away from you without harming you? Can you cancel the contract with 6 months notice? I mean, what's the deal? Be sure it's in writing and be sure you have really thought it through. Get legal advice. Be absolutely sure you've got good legal advice. Minimize the legalese. In other words, you want it to be in plain English so it's easy to understand. And don't try to pull something off on someone. Just be honest. This is the deal. This is what we're offering you. Is it okay with you? And fine, just make sure that whatever you're agreeing to, if it were all publicly known, if the students got a hold of the contract, the teachers got a hold of the contract, you wouldn't have a hard time justifying what you did. Now, obviously, we would always recommend try to turn the people within your school into leaders. That doesn't mean you always have to hire your next head of school from within your existing staff, but my goodness, you got these wonderful people there. It's a really good idea to try to see if they've got the potential to become a head of school, even if, as Lindsay, you suggested, it's not in your school, it's in someone else's school. And at Barry, we used to say, spend your years here, get yourself out, go run another school. And if you're ever interested in another senior position at our school, come back and talk to us. I think that can be great. Anyway, the bottom line is you want to provide mentorship to your leaders and to your senior teachers as they mature in their classrooms. Encourage them to be part of tough decision making or conflict resolution or strategic planning or policy development. It's really a good idea to have more and more and more people who know how the ship runs. You want to give people a feeling that whether they're an assistant in a classroom, a first-year teacher, a 10-year teacher, an admissions, you want to give people a feeling that in our school, we are constantly learning and growing. And we're learning not only about how to be better at our current job, we're cross-training. The admissions director understands how the business office works and so forth. Doesn't mean everyone ought to be the business manager, but the more everyone knows how to read a balance sheet or a cash flow budget, the better. And then recognize potential. Keep looking for people within your organization who are showing potential to become leaders. Now, you want to have a process for the search, a process for having the search conducted. You're going to have a search committee normally. You don't want to have one person out there doing it. Somebody has got to be responsible for posting the ad and the messaging, and there may be a web page that you create on your website saying we are looking for a head of school and this is what you need to know. And there can be all kinds of stuff that you reveal to candidates. And it could be public information. It could be confidential. It could be a page on your website that you do not publish. It's private and people have to have a password to see it. And you only give it to the candidates that you invite to see it. It could be that it's information you fire off by email to them. But you want to think about how are you going to communicate what you need to know about our school. You want to think about what are the qualifications you're going to put in your search advertisements. And you want to have really clear objectives. This is what we're trying to have happen. You probably don't want to get 1,000 applications from unqualified individuals.
And Tim, I know you said earlier we are not employment lawyers. We're not HR specialists. Please double check your state and federal requirements. I have seen some schools get into some hot water about not posting positions publicly, depending on what, if you're public, if you're private, there may be different regulations about posting a position. I know in Texas, for example, a position for a public school position must be publicly posted at least 10 days. So just, follow the timeline, check and make sure you're following the laws. Even if you think you know who it is that you may be considering, be sure to follow the guidelines regarding postings.
Absolutely. Well, the other thing is you want to watch out to resist the temptation to simply announce to the teachers, that Tim Seldon be retiring this coming summer, and Lindsay Pollock, who you never were invited to even think about her, she's going to be your next head of school in June. That can really backfire. So people like to know positions going to become available. Can they apply for it? What are the minimum qualifications to be considered as a candidate? How's the decision going to get made? Is it going to be equitable? Is it just going to be whoever the board loves more this year? All kinds of crazy things you want to try to avoid. Um,
And Tim, I would just another caveat. I know sometimes I have worked with heads of schools who very well meaning may have said to someone on their team something like, Tim, you'd be my first choice. I hope you are the person who succeeds me. And that person might then really get their hopes up. They may be hearing, oh, Lindsay just endorsed me. I've got it. I'm a shoe-in. I'm going to have the job. And that may not ultimately be what happens. The board may go with someone else, and that could lead to hard feelings, hurt feelings. It may lead to, tensions on the admin teams. So, just a word of caution to, folks out there who might be thinking about, you know, transitioning out of their role. Be careful what you're saying to the folks around you. Because even though you might have very capable colleagues and folks that you might really think could be the next head of school, your board of directors may choose someone else. So choose your words wisely.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example from my past. When I stepped away from the Newgate School back in, I think it was 1999, the board, made a choice that I thought was at that time the right one. There was no Montessori leader that was interested in going to a small school in Sarasota, Florida at the time. And they appointed a really great guy who was a former chair of the board and not an educator, an architect, but boy, he was the right fit for Newgate at that time. And then after 5 years, they decided they needed a business manager or a businessman. And they wanted a man, number one, which I'm not sure that the uh, the second in command felt really great about that because she wasn't even considered. But they hired somebody who was a very qualified educational leader. But this person was not a Montessorian, did not really feel that comfortable with Montessori and wasn't the best fit for the school. That didn't mean that he didn't have many great characteristics and do some great things, but ultimately it didn't work out well, and the board had to part ways with this person. The bottom line is boards can do really crazy things. You want to try to help people to make the best decisions they can and to really, here's the way I look at it. Strong educational leaders are really hard to find. People who have an MBA, who understand business, they're not so hard to find. That doesn't mean a great MBA is going to be able to build a business. Not every person with a master's in business is a great business leader. But the bottom line is you can hire business managers pretty easily. Um, you can't necessarily hire a great school leader who can build a school.
You're so right, Tim. And we do have a question in the chat. Soraya is asking, is what is on the agreement written like engraving on a stone? Because I have seen all those promises, but with some excuses such as financial problems, or it will be for a short time, etc. What could we do about that? Uh,
Well, Sarai, I'm not quite sure what the context of your question is, but a contract is a contract. And pretty much across the United States and Canada, a contract is very enforceable. That doesn't mean that if the school can't honor the contract, that it can't get out of it, but there's always a consequence. I mean, again, you can only do what you can do, but it's not like a contract can be simply um, pretend that it's not there. So, I mean, again, I can't offer you legal advice. I can simply say, get it in writing, get a good contract. And typically, on both sides, you want an escape clause. A board needs a way if things aren't working, if they can't afford to keep operating, they got to be able to change direction. And it could
mhm.
be that you weren't the right fit for the school and they need to get a new head. But there's also typically a way to what's called mitigate damages. In other words, if I have to cancel my agreement with Lindsay, there needs to be a way that I can say, Lindsay, you get 6 months salary and no harm, no foul, not going to disparage you. You don't disparage me. We just part ways as friends, and I'm so sorry. It didn't work out.
That's right. And remember, you can't get blood from a turnip either. So if the organization goes bankrupt, yes, you could file a lien or a claim against the organization. And remember, if there's no money, you may have to hire an attorney and wait a long time to see any portion of that settlement. So there are usually, like Tim said, escape clauses. Again, I'm not an attorney. And I would encourage you, if you're going into contract negotiations, to have an attorney. It might cost you some upfront money, but in the end, you might be grateful for that. Hopefully, you never need that. You never need to go back to the attorney, but having those clear understandings at the beginning just makes it better for everyone. Brene Brown always says, clear is kind. So, consider seeking legal advice right from the start.
As an aside, I just looked at the participants and I see a number of friends are here. One of whom is Dr. John Moncur, who I was bragging on earlier. John, I'm so glad you're here, and please feel free to unmute and join in at any time because, man, you could run this workshop 6 ways to Sunday. John, by the way, is the author of a book on running a Montessori school. And John is the kind of guy who could run an Army Corps, he can run a school, he can run a military school, you name it, John can run it. He's one of those kind of people. Um,
Tim,
so
speaking of running the webinar, we have run out of time. It's already 1:02. We may have to revisit this at a future session.
we certainly do. And I think what's missing from here is more about how do you check references? How do you know that someone's the right fit? How do you onboard them? So we will do a part two. It will not be next week because Lindsay, you've arranged for a guest next week. Tell us
Yes,
about next week.
next week we have Art and Bina Costa coming to join us. They are the authors and co-creators of Habits of Mind, and you may also recognize Art Costa's name from cognitive coaching. So we're very honored to have them joining us next week, talking about leadership and strategies to strengthen your school leadership. And then, Tim, we'll have to revisit our topic from today.
We will indeed. John Moncur, Sheila Griffin, all the rest, Stacy Caldout, all of you who are here who we know well, we're so glad you joined us. We'd love to hear whether you feel that this webinar forum is better than doing it in a Zoom meeting where we have more of a give and take. We do one of those every Tuesday, as you may know, at the same time. But we're trying this format for our our independent school leadership forum. And even though we've mentioned Montessori many times, and even though I am from the Montessori Foundation, we speak Episcopalian, Jewish day school, military school, Catholic school, charter school, public school, whatever kind of school you represent, we honor you, we honor your work, and we're glad to work with you too. We're here to help. Lindsay, thank you for everything, my friend.
Thank you, Tim. Always good to see you. Everybody stay warm and stay safe out there. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right. And I will ask our folks to send the full PDF of the slideshow to everyone who registered for today's session. Goodbye, everyone. We'll
See
see
you
you
next
soon.
week.
Bye.
Bye bye for now.